Hello, everybody. I'm going to get started. I want to begin with a story, one that you're likely familiar with. It's the story of Kodak. So Kodak dominated the U.S. market in film for about a century. And a century is a very long time. It's practically unheard of. At their peak, they had 85% of the U.S. market for cameras. They employed more than 145,000 workers worldwide, and their annual revenue peaked at nearly $16 billion in 1996. Unfortunately, shortly after, Kodak dragged its feet on entering the digital market. It was actually a Kodak engineer that essentially built the first digital camera. However, Kodak wasn't interested. They basically said no one wants to look at their picture on a television set. By the time they got in the digital game, it was way too late. Competitors like Sony and Canon beat them to it. The story is particularly sad because the new technology that ultimately was the demise of Kodak was invented by Kodak itself. So what does this have to do with law and professional service firms? Well, Kodak went south because of the rapidly changing market, and they didn't move quick enough to adapt. Or maybe they were just reluctant to adapt. Over the last decade, the market for law firm services has also dramatically changed. Clients are demanding more value, greater efficiency, transparency, lower costs, and much, much more. And also, the competitive landscape has changed a lot. We have more competition. It's oversaturated market. We have all different kinds of tools to market ourselves before we did, 10 years ago. So like the Kodak story, some law firms are stuck in what's called denial-driven inertia, and this was mentioned at the conference. Denial-driven inertia is people that believe that somehow the model that brought them success in the past will continue to lead them to success in the future. I can't tell you how many firms that say they still significantly rely on word of mouth, or a more popular one that Burbe hears is that my clients won't look online to find me. Word of mouth may have helped them to get to where they are now, but a lot believe it will just continue. And I'm not saying that word of mouth has become obsolete. I just am saying that that's the kind of denial-driven inertia that paralyzes some law firms. And I'll be talking in more detail about denial-driven inertia later on. Okay, so just a quick intro. I want to introduce myself and what we'll be covering today. My name is Megan Braverman. I'm a senior account manager with Burbe Marketing and Public Relations. We work with law firms and other professional services businesses to increase visibility that fuels revenue growth. So I attended this year's 23rd Annual Marketing Partner Forum, and I'll be giving cliff notes on the conference. It was a 3-day conference, and they covered a lot of ground, so this presentation will too cover a lot of ground, but I'm mostly going to focus on today's rapidly changing law firm environment and what firms are doing about it. Although the conference is geared towards law firms, much of it can be applied to professional services firms as well as smaller law firms. The conference is also geared towards larger firms. A quick reminder that you can submit questions throughout the webinar. There's a questions box. I'll leave about 5 minutes at the end for questions, but I'll make sure to reach out to everyone separately if your question wasn't answered. Okay, to begin, I want to start with the panel titled Legal Industry Trends. It illustrates data surrounding legal marketing and business development. It's really the state of today's law firm market. These statistics you'll see are from the Thomson Reuters Legal Executive Survey. They surveyed nearly 150 law firms. Okay, as you can see from this chart, the demand for law firm services is pretty flat. Many law firms are continuing to experience sluggish growth, negative productivity, and continued pressure on rates. Gone are the days of the 4 to 6% growth we saw once upon a time. Some of the reasons are the new entries to market, which I'll discuss later, but law firms are just finding themselves in an entirely new competitive landscape where we're competing against traditional models, there's the surplus of new kinds of firms, and we're using all different kinds of technology to market. So I'm sure we can all relate to the pressurization of rates. whether you're a law firm or really any other business, it's really becoming the game of chicken, and rates will only continue to be pressured. You know, in-house counsel especially, and many clients are looking for lower rates, more creative pricing, basically anything to lower their legal costs. So the client pushback is really mounting for everyone. What I find interesting in this next chart is that it shows that the rates for law firms are continuing to go up even though client pushback is mounting. You can see the different lines on this graph. The bottom line, the orange, is the amount collected. The blue line is the amount billed. The black line is the amount worked. And the gray line is the standard rate. So, of course, law firms need to be profitable, but price does matter to clients. So law firms, I think, need to really realize that if they can't tangibly demonstrate how they can control costs, their clients are going to find someone else who can. Unfortunately, the gap in thinking between reinventing how you bill clients and the lawyers who grew up under the billable hour model remains very wide. I'm hoping that improving the way that lawyers practice by integrating automation systems, different work processes, technology, it will create an opportunity to become a much more efficient law firm, meaning, you know, it opens the doors for lawyers to charge less, add more value, and make more money at the same time. The next chart shows the large gap in our realization. So as you can see here, where the first red circle is, in 2005, the amount billed and the amount collected was almost the same. The orange line is the collection and the blue line is the billing. Where we are today in 2015, there's a big spread between the amount billed and collected. One of the panelists actually made a comment, you know, at what point does the law firm industry develop a jewelry store mindset? You know, you see jewelry stores have these big sale signs in their window, 50% off or store-wide sale. And one of the panelists had said, when are law firms going to do this? In terms of revenue growth for law firms, I want to point out two interesting facts that I pulled from these charts, although they're a bit small on the PowerPoint slides. One is that there's a revenue growth of 3.5%. That sounds great, right? Not so sluggish as I mentioned before. However, this number is a little bit misleading as it's driven by the increase in rates and the fact that law firms are continuing to add more lawyers to their team. So some law firms are shrinking and they're letting go of personnel as their revenues decline. Other firms, the growing firms, are adding to their headcount. In fact, many law firms are sort of in this lockstep with their revenue growth. You know, if revenue goes up 5%, their headcount goes up 5%. Efficiency isn't really on their radar screen. So I also want to point out one other item on this chart that is also a bit misleading. It looks like the AmLaw firms, AmLaw 100 and 200, are doing fairly well. However, if you look closely at the two red circles on the slides, you can see that mid-sized law firms are in fact outperforming on all other categories. And this really points to the trend that people are sending more work to smaller firms. Okay, so I want to segue into some of the stats discussing the marketing and business development functions at law firms. One thing law firms are responding to is making sure that they have these marketing and BD efforts in place. I'm going to use BD, which is business development. As shown in the chart, marketing and BD budgets have increased and will continue to. I thought it was interesting. From last year, the budgets are sliding back a little bit, but there's still significant growth. I just think that law firms are thinking about how to spend their budgets more wisely. On the next slide, I just pulled sort of the top 3 initiatives, which I'll explain. This slide, firms indicate their marketing and BD professionals and how they contribute to important aspects of the firm. So these 3 are the top 3. The percentage shows importance of initiatives. So improving business development is 76%. Controlling costs is 48%, and recruiting effective partners is 48%. I find the 48% of controlling costs, that's very important to the marketing and BD arms. I thought that was very interesting because a lot of marketing and BD professionals don't necessarily have a seat at the table when it comes to pricing. Okay, so measuring, I wanted to, this is something maybe I shouldn't be so surprised about, but it really always makes me just fall out of my chair. 76% of firms do not measure return on investment, meaning 76% of law firms are not tracking or measuring the effectiveness of their marketing. I don't know. It just really blows me away that nobody's doing this, or I shouldn't say nobody. There's a large percentage that isn't. You know, there's a number of ways to do this. For example, you can look at revenue as opposed to what was spent. That's one way. Another way is measuring how many leads and how many cases came in and what channels they came in from. You may find that your smallest source of business is your largest source of revenue. But how would we know this? Because few firms explicitly measure ROI. And by the way, last year I went to the Marketing Partner Forum conference, and this percentage was 75%, so we only increased by 1% from last year to this year. I just find it a little crazy, and I'm going to talk more about measuring later on, but if you take anything away from this presentation, I hope it's this, that you will implement tracking systems in 2016. Okay, in this next chart, it shows the biggest challenges for marketing and business development professionals. Lawyer engagement and lack of resources are the biggest challenges, as noted. I think that the inability to differentiate is also up there. And by lack of resources, you know, budget, time, and staff is what they defined it as. Sponsorships and advertisements seem to consume a lot of the budget, but the perception is that it's not effective. And I thought that was interesting because, well, why are we spending if it's not that effective? It's because ads and sponsorships are very easy and it doesn't require a lot of lawyer time, if not any. Okay, so towards the end of the legal industry trends presentation, they touched on competitive advantage. In the survey, 64% defined competitive advantage. No, I'm sorry, I need to skip ahead here. Okay, 64% of firms define their competitive advantage. And that marketing and business development provides a very large part in not only defining it, but communicating it externally. The most common differentiators that they notice is relationships, industry expertise, and client strategy. I think many firms are realizing how hard it is to identify their differentiators, especially in such an oversaturated market. One way of doing this is to look at the new entries to market and seeing what they're doing. I think firms really need to start looking outside of the traditional model, you know, even seeing what other industries are doing, like accounting firms or, you know, real estate companies, and why, you know, and the new entries to market in the law firm industry, you know, why they're a threat to your business model. So now that we've gotten a peek behind the curtain, we kind of know what the law firm playing field looks like. You know, it's very clear the environment and the way that we do business are changing, and we need to keep up. So I mentioned earlier, some law firms, and at varying degrees, are stuck in a denial-driven inertia. They believe that somehow the model that brought them success in the past will continue to lead them to success in the future. Like Kodak, we need to keep up before we're steamrolled by our competitors. So now what? What does this information mean to you? Okay, what do I do with all this stuff? And the following slides are going to be some action items to consider. Okay, so do good work and good work will come. I think everyone's heard this statement before. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you know, things have gotten a whole lot more complicated. Doing good work may bring you business, it may not, or it may not be fast enough for you. It's about amplifying the good work so that others know about it. And this was one of the topics that came up during the panel called Designing a Wholly Integrated Marketing and Business Development Model. One thing which I touched on earlier is that firms are still competing against traditional models and against the spawn of non-traditional new entries to market that didn't exist several years ago. Also, folks are taking their legal services in-house. There are new kinds of firms that popped up. I mean, I'm sure you've heard a lot of like the accordion-style law firms where firms add new people as independent contractors when they need them. There's virtual law firms. There's all different kinds that we're competing against now. So in order to define what you're doing different, you need to take a look at the competitive landscape. And I want to show you one example of what a non-traditional law firm is doing. So this is a firm called AXIOM. AXIOM touts itself through several differentiators. You can see on their website, this is the home page of their website, by the way. The big orange part says, forget everything you thought you knew about legal services. They market themselves as modern interpretation of a law firm on a diet, not your father's law firm, all very clever and innovative ways to differentiate. What's interesting, though, and I'm going to show you, this is sort of their about page. It's actually a very different kind of law firm. They have lawyers, but also they have attorney recruitment professionals, business operation professionals, etc. So again, this is just one interesting non-traditional law firm that we're competing against. And as you can see from the home page and this about page, I don't think anyone has seen anything like this with a law firm. So I just thought this was interesting to point out. Okay, so going back to what I mentioned about amplifying all the great work that you do, there are so many ways to do this. You may have heard the words like push and pull marketing. With push marketing, the idea is to promote your services by pushing them onto people. This can include your website, email newsletter blasts, etc. Pull marketing is the idea to establish a loyal following and draw clients to purchase your services. So some examples can include advertising, word of mouth referrals, client relationship matters, etc. I think that both are important, but I do think with the .com bubble, everything started to shift, and firms are really focused on driving relationships, overcoming objections, having conversations about price, etc. So the next illustration shows you several ways to focus on amplifying your good work. I actually recreated a slide that this panel showed, which basically illustrates the client sales journey. It shows the process, but the pieces that you need to have in place. And I just want to note that none of this is earth-shattering new information, but again, it's about how you can focus on what differentiates you from the competition and selecting the right marketing tactics to make sure that the word gets out. So as you can see at the bottom of this triangle, there's awareness, creating awareness. And this is things like I call, credentialing, having your website, your bios, social media sites, basically things that people can go to and learn more about you. And you really want to think about describing yourself or your brand in a way that not only sells, but that people can understand. I mean, time and time again, I'll read bios and websites that it's just, I don't get it. And you just want to make it as easy as possible for the reader to see that there's a need and that you'll clearly come to mind first. And I think it's also an overlooked aspect of your marketing mix because you're so close to it or you think people will just get it. But you know how good you are, so it must be easy for others to understand, but it's actually not. So something to consider. So then the next step is credibility, establishing this credibility, and it's really establishing yourself as a thought leader. And this can come through speaking engagements, writing articles, blogs, getting quoted in the media, rankings like Chambers and Partners and Super Lawyers. Then the next step is really driving the relationships to the firm. And this can be done through, infographics or custom research in the industry, client relationship management. Again, it demonstrates your strong foothold in the industry. And I really see the next two parts as sealing the deal. It's using custom proposals and industry research to show that you can help them with their legal problem, and also that you understand their business. We find that a lot of firms do some of this in this triangle, but oftentimes there's a disconnect. For example, they may have the awareness piece in place, but they've skipped the credibility portion. So make sure you go through your pieces and you have the whole triangle in place. Okay, so once you have your pieces in place, the whole purpose of marketing can be compared to chickens sitting on their eggs. It's the same concept. Marketing is all about keeping prospects warm until there's a need. So what it really boils down to is generating leads and the kind that will bring you new clients. So the more leads you can generate, the more opportunity there is for you to land your next client. I tell prospects and clients all the time, when it comes to marketing, you're really just playing the numbers game. There's no one best way to market. It's really your marketing mix, putting together a mix of tactics, and there's just no formula to it. You need to see what works for you and your prospective clients. So when you're thinking about your marketing mix for this year, take a look at what's worked and what hasn't. For example, you may have done an email campaign last year and got great results, but you stopped doing that. So maybe it's time to pick that up again. Or maybe something didn't work 5 years ago, but it's time to try it again. Or maybe it just wasn't executed properly 5 years ago. So this is where measuring ROI comes in. Burbay is always harping on the fact that measuring where your business and leads come from is a crucial part of any firm, and it's really invaluable information. It shows what's working and what's not, and it allows you to redirect investment based on this measurement. So you can start by creating a simple tick sheet to track this. I've shown you an example that we've created for a client. Although very, very basic in its nature, it serves a purpose. You may find that the majority of your leads are coming from former clients, and you think to yourself, okay, I need to invest more in marketing to former clients. But if you look at it from a revenue perspective, maybe your revenue generation is coming from the smallest portion of your leads, such as your website. Regardless, I can promise you that if you start tracking where your business comes from and how effective your marketing campaigns are, you will be really enlightened. We've implemented this for several clients, and the results are really eye-opening. And it also will give you enough information to make educational decisions on how to invest your marketing dollars and your time. Okay, so segueing on, the next panel I wanted to highlight is called The Ties That Bind, Cross-Generational Leadership in Client Retention and Business Development. So this panel addressed the age-old question, what do in-house counsel want? And of course, the first thing that was talked about was that in-house counselors are always looking for more cost-efficient legal options. They said experience at lower cost, and that they don't want to be 0.1 or 0.2 to death. They want to be able to call you with a quick question without being charged. Lower cost was one of the things they highlighted. However, what I thought was very interesting was lower costs was not the focal point of this presentation. What was discussed for most of this presentation was to have cross-generational teams. In-house counsel, they want to see teams that include a senior partner, an associate, and even a paralegal. They said that oftentimes the partners will strangle control over the matter, and that can essentially strangle out the relationship. And they also said there's nothing worse when a partner is too busy, but the associates are not allowed to communicate with the client directly. So I thought this was very interesting. They also mentioned something that, in-house counsel, they're really good at sniffing out dysfunction in a firm. They have a really good radar on the culture of firms they work with, so they can smell dysfunction and will stay far away from it. All of the panel members agreed that a highly functional firm is paying with their own dollars to teach associates. They want to deepen the relationships with firms that have a culture of handing over the reins. And I just thought that was a really good point because they're putting a lot more emphasis on succession planning. They want to see younger folks on the team. So I think it's time for lawyers who haven't gotten on this bandwagon to recognize the value of involving their young partners, or young associates in marketing and business development activities. So I want to touch on quickly what partners can do to help their associates. So one thing that they mentioned is to consider incorporating a shadow program where associates have to fulfill a certain amount of hours shadowing some senior level person. For example, this could be joining a partner in a client meeting, going to a networking function with them. It could be a cross-selling meeting. It's one thing for an associate to read about the process, but it's another to see a partner in action. It's just like, when you got your first job out of college, it's very different from what you learned in school. The other thing, of course, is mentoring. At any time you can help them be a better professional and point out not only good things about them, but the things they need to improve on. Mentoring the associates is always very valuable. Also involving them on collaborating activities is very important to an associate's growth. They can draft, research, or co-author an article with a partner. They may be able to conduct some research for a formal pitch meeting and actually bring them to the pitch meeting. It shows the prospect that the firm really values its associates and considers them a vital part of the team. So helping associates chart and achieve their practice and business development goals will benefit the firm in the long run. I mean, happy associates means reduced turnover, satisfied clients, and there's more of a contribution to business development efforts. Burbay has written a lot of articles and blogs on the subject matter, discussing what in-house counsel want and how to support associates' growth. If you want to find that on our website, we go into more detail about that. Okay, another item that this panel discussed about what do in-house counsel want. There was a discussion about having pricing professionals at law firms. So in-house legal departments, of course, have been facing some cost-saving pressures, which I think everybody could feel. And with the billable hours slowly diminishing, it's kind of making this way for increased discounting and alternative fee arrangements. And firms have recognized the need for professionals who can help determine costs and recommend pricing structures that might satisfy the client, but also so that the law firm makes a profit. So this panel, they said that a highly functional law firm cares about their quality of budgeting. And so they said that pricing professionals can often make in-house counsel look really good to their operations or their other departments. You know, one of the guys on the panel had mentioned that law firms are really a decade behind most industries in terms of data-driven analytics. So the more data-driven facts behind your pricing, the more validity there is to it. And they feel very confident when they hand a bill over to accounting that there was a pricing professional behind it. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, so I know we covered a lot of ground today, but I'm hoping everyone is able to walk away with some pearls of wisdom. You know, in the end, this isn't really rocket science or a new revelation. Some of you have already done this before, but the competitive advantage comes with the small things. I was actually meeting with a client and also a friend the other day who was talking about survival of the fittest. And that's what this is about, surviving and adapting to the changes in our industry. Hopefully you can find some pearls of wisdom that you can take back with you and implement and help your firm survive the change. So before I open it up for questions, I want to announce our next webinar. It's featuring organic communications partners Lee and Judith. You will learn lawyers will learn how to balance their competing professional and personal demands. It's going to be on February 25th. Okay, so I want to open it for questions now, and of course, if there are, if anybody wants the recorded version of this or the PowerPoint slide, that will be available and emailed out. One question that came in was, what is the biggest misstep you see law firms make? And I know I keep harping on this, but I think the biggest misstep is the fact that people are not tracking their marketing and business development efforts. I think that is really crucial. And like I said, you know, it's very enlightening to see what those numbers show. Sometimes you find that there are certain niches that you didn't really know about. Like, for example, oh, we've worked with, you know, 3 manufacturing clients. Well, that's a trend. Maybe we should target more manufacturing clients. So there's all sorts of things that are brought up in these conversations when you're looking at these analytics. So I would say that. And then someone asked about, can we get a copy of the slide deck? And yes, I will send that out, and I'll make sure to answer the remaining questions that people submitted. But I really appreciate you listening in. Again, I hope you got some pearls of wisdom from the presentation, and contact me anytime if you have other questions. Thanks very much.